Picture this. The best team in the country has just moved to a state-of-the-art stadium that has double the seats, which earned them the highest ticket revenue in world football. What do you think would happen to that team? You'd expect them to achieve more success, right? Well, what if I told you that it would actually lead to the most disastrous period in the club's history? One where they lost their best players, won no trophies, fell from relevance, and turned a manager who was once hailed the best in the land into just a shell of his former glory. So how did it get this bad? What actually happened for Arsenal to struggle this much? Most fans think they know what happened, but the truth is the story behind Arsenal's collapse is far more complicated than anything you've heard before. I spent countless hours digging through financial records, interviews, board statements, even documents most fans never knew existed. What I found wasn't the story people tell online. It was something deeper, rarer, and much more revealing. What you're about to see is the part nobody tells. This is the real story of Arsenal's collapse. Wenger's first decade at Arsenal propelled the club to the forefront of English football, claiming 3 Premier League titles and 4 FA Cups in the club's most successful period in their history. They built this era at Highbury, the club's infamous ground. It had become the soul of the club, but Arsenal had to do this with a major disadvantage. Their main rivals at the time were Man United, who compared to Arsenal had way more financial power than them thanks to a bigger stadium and higher commercial revenue. This allowed Man United to buy star players yearly and break the transfer record with ease, something Arsenal couldn't do. The thing is, despite the lack of spending, Wenger was still winning. He knew how to build a strong team, find hidden gems in the market to turn the club into a trophy-winning machine. Spending power and finances wasn't enough to hold them back. That was until someone came along and completely changed the rules of the game. The actual gap between Arsenal and United spending was big, but over 5 years it's an extra £17 million a year. That gap can be bridged. But a new market spender was about to blow this gap wide open. In 2003, Russian billionaire Roman Abramovich bought Chelsea for £60 million, with one goal in mind: win. His strategy for winning was to spend as much money as he could to improve the team. In just his first transfer window as owner of Chelsea, they spent more money than every other Premier League club had over the past 5 years. In his second year, he once again spent like crazy. Those 2 combined years of spending were disproportionate to any other team, and by this point, Chelsea were unstoppable. They won the league by buying the best players and best manager. Wenger was the first to voice his concern about Chelsea's unregulated spending, calling it financial doping. But he could only watch on helplessly as his team could barely spend a tenth of his rivals, and Chelsea were not slowing down anytime soon. The longer Arsenal waited to bridge the financial gap, the wider that gap would get. Without a billionaire owner to pump money into the club, Arsenal's only way of spending was by earning more, and the only way to do that was to replace the soul of Arsenal. Highbury was the heart of the club, but from a practicality standpoint, the club simply outgrew it. The ground's capacity was 38,500, which was the 11th biggest club stadium in England and was a mid-tier stadium compared to the rest of Europe. If Arsenal wanted to be a European giant, they needed a stadium like one, and for every year that passed they weren't in one, it cost the club tens of millions. So very quickly they planned to expand. In May 2002, their planning permission for a new 60,000 capacity stadium was approved. It included building a new ground and turning Highbury Stadium into a block of modern flats. All of this was to be financed by Arsenal. This was not a cheap or straightforward project. Members at the club were nervous, but the club knew this was an investment for the future and risk was a part of it. To ease some of the nerves about earning potential of the stadium, the board wanted to make sure they made some guaranteed money, so they signed a 15-year naming rights deal and a 7-year shirt sponsor deal worth £100 million with Emirates, making them the official club sponsor for Arsenal. By July 2006, the ground was complete. The construction of the Highbury flats wasn't, but the club was just happy to finally move into a new ground. The yearly interest cost of the stadium, however, was not small. They had to pay £20 million a year for 25 years, meaning for this to be worth it, Arsenal needed to make a big chunk of money if they wanted to comfortably pay off this debt. Well, their first year at the Emirates didn't meet anyone's expectation. In the 05-06 season, you can see how much less they were making in matchday revenue. But in the 06-07 season, when they moved stadiums, they earned more than double what they previously earned. They now had the second highest matchday revenue in the world. The stadium was a huge success. The board took a massive risk, unsure whether it would work, but so far it looked like it was going to pay off. But something changed at Arsenal. Wenger would make a drastic change to a policy that would start to raise some questions. Wenger had a new recruitment policy, out with the old, in with the new. Most of Wenger's trusted invincibles were shown the door once they reached 30. This started with Vieira, who in 2005 was sold to Juventus to make room for a 17-year-old Fabregas. This strategy continued for the first 3 years of the Emirates era, when Arsenal started to let key players go after a certain age. Eventually Henry, Perez, Bergkamp, Campbell, Ljungberg and more all left. Wenger made sure to replace these guys with young prospects with high potential. Names like Walcott, Adebayor, Diaby, Ramsey, Nasri, all 21 or younger when they joined. It was clear there was a massive rebuild taking place, but this policy wasn't followed 100%. There were a few anomalies, the big anomaly being a prime 25-year-old Ashley Cole, one of their standout performers who was sold to their major rivals Chelsea in 2006. Watching Arsenal's best players leave didn't instill much confidence that the team could continue winning, but Wenger was adamant this was the way forward. So did this policy work? In their first 3 years at the Emirates, their performances took a hit. Their league positions and cup performances suffered, and a team that were used to winning trophies now hadn't won one for 4 years. Lack of experience got the better of them. Their dressing room started to turn toxic, with William Gallas being stripped of captaincy due to verbally attacking his own teammates and claims that team morale and leadership was being ruined. And when you really look at it, was that a surprise? Was Eduardo really a replacement for Henry? Song for Vieira? Walcott for Perez? So why even risk this strategy in the first place? Arsenal wanted to cash in on aging stars, which is why so many invincibles left. Vieira didn't want to go, but at 29 with 2 years left on his deal, the club could either lose him for free, sell him well into his 30s for cheap, or cash in now and hope one of the youngsters could make up for his absence. But of course the knock-on effect of selling a few star names is that other star names want to leave as well because they believe the team is getting weaker. So why not replace elite players with elite players? Well, Wenger had to deal with the fact that players became too expensive and transfer inflation was on the rise. Market disruptors like Chelsea increased the price of average players, like when they signed Shaw Phillips for €31.5 million despite his market value being €9.5 million. Another thing that Wenger voiced his displeasure about. As a result, Wenger refused to overpay for mediocre talent and settled for signing young players, hoping he can turn them into stars. The club was still making good money though. Their profit numbers were still some of the best in the league. In fact, their cash balance increased year on year, so money was floating around. Money Wenger wasn't too keen on spending. He believed Arsenal could find a way of winning without spending money. He staked his entire reputation on it. If Arsenal failed to win, it lay solely on his shoulders. But the football landscape was about to be turned upside down again. In 2008, Man City were the next team taken over by billionaires, and they too instantly got to spending. In 1 year, their net spend surpassed Arsenal's net spend in their entire history. The more and more reluctant Wenger was to spend, the more and more teams like City, Chelsea and Man United were willing to. The gap in spending got wider and wider, and it became nearly impossible for Arsenal to compete. Behind the scenes for Arsenal, things started to crumble as well. Vice Chairman David Dein, who was a close friend of Wenger's and long-time part owner, left the board, creating a massive division amongst ownership. Despite all of this, Wenger's policy was slowly making progress. Young players were developing well, and Arsenal even made the Champions League semi-final in 2009. He kept his team in the top 4 and sold out 60,000 seats regularly. It looked like Wenger's approach was actually working. Arsenal were building patiently, but it was just a matter of whether they could maintain this progress. The first 3 years of the Emirates era was about rebuilding the squad, but the following 3 years was about to turn the entire plan on its head. If their old policy was selling players past their prime, well, now Arsenal was selling players during their prime. Adebayor, Kolo Touré, Fabregas, Nasri, Clichy were all in the best years of their career before selling them. So what made Arsenal sell their best players in their best years? Well, for one, other clubs simply offered more money. The players who left got huge wage increases, wages that Arsenal were not willing to match. Touré cited dressing room toxicity, specifically his long-standing feud with Gallas, as his reason for leaving.
Arsène had some young players in front of him. In any team, you need some experience. You need some leaders there. And I think Arsène Wenger suffered on that, in my opinion. No, I didn't want to leave Arsenal, but at one point it became to be it started to be a little bit toxic, because other players coming and they're coming with different mindsets, and especially when you play at the back and you don't get on very well with people, it's quite difficult.
And well, for Cesc Fabregas, Arsenal captain and best player, he left because Arsenal weren't in a position to fulfill his wish of winning.
Because of the frustration of so many years not winning, at Arsenal and feeling that sometimes the club was not going through the line or just to make really good signings and to be super competitive in the Champions League and the league. I just felt I was draining myself because I was giving so much and playing 60 games a season and injured and coming back quickly and never resting. Emotionally, it just affected me quite a lot, and then seeing everyone winning in Barcelona.
The winning culture was non-existent, and the club weren't putting in the effort, making the changes or even the right signings to push winning. This perceived lack of ambition is why a lot of players left. Those young players that Wenger was working so hard to develop, he ended up just selling to rivals and let them reap the rewards of his hard work. While Arsenal were losing their best players and missing out signing elite names, the club continued to barely spend, looking for cheap bargains as they failed to replace their talent. This frugal approach in the transfer market set Arsenal back even further. Their performances didn't improve. They never finished above third place or made it past the Champions League quarter-final, nor did they win any trophies during the spell. The closest they got was the 2011 League Cup final, where they lost to Birmingham City, who got relegated that year. Wenger was slowly slipping away. Winning got further from his grasp, and he knew his legacy in football was falling apart. Yet Arsenal, this whole time, was still making profit year on year. The stadium still continued to generate massive amounts of revenue, and the cash balances went up. The board were delighted with the money the club was making. Wenger, however, was desperate to win, and he still believed he had what it took to not spend a fortune and win. So a big decision ended up being made. The 2011-2012 season saw Arsenal take a massive hit. They lost Fabregas and Nasri, finished 19 points behind the league leaders, and suffered an embarrassing 8-2 loss to a team they were once better than. Wenger knew going into the 2012-2013 season, he had to make a change if he wanted any chance of winning the league. So the big change that he made was making sure that his best player, Robin van Persie, who won the Golden Boot, PFA Player of the Year, and was club captain, was sold to their biggest rivals for 31 million euros. This was the final nail to cement the fact Arsenal were no longer a serious title contending club. Every player who was worth anything was now gone, abandoned ship to win trophies elsewhere. It was rock bottom. Wenger believed that winning the league was always a possibility, but after this, even he knew the club were in serious trouble. How did it get this bad? They built the shiny new stadium, were making profit and had money in reserves. They had the players and foundation to challenge for a league title and were linked with world-class players, desperate to join who would have made them champions. Well, the truth is, those were just the consequences. The real story is in the details you may have never heard, the ones that fully paint the picture of why it all went wrong. Once you know these details, it will all start to make sense. To fully understand, we need to go back to 2002 when Arsenal started building their new stadium. Almost nothing about this project went according to plan. The club took a £260 million loan from the bank, but the price of the project ended up costing around £430 million. Director Danny Fiszman said it was more expensive than originally anticipated. This was problem number one, but bigger problems started to arise. Their next major concern was, first, the banks wanted some insurance of Arsenal actually paying the loan back. They demanded that Arsenal restrict their salaries to 50% of their overall budget, as well as Wenger had to sign on for 5 years, bring Champions League football 3 of those 5 years, and fill 90% of the stadium every week. Arsenal's hands were tied. They were too reliant on the banks to say no and restricted themselves massively to secure the loan. Wenger was trapped. He was the only way the stadium could be built. Their second major problem was raising funds. The bank loans didn't even cover the full cost, so they needed to generate money. They did that by signing deals with Emirates and Nike. The commercial deals may have seemed smart at the time, but this ended up being one of the most financially damaging decisions they could have made. They signed very long-term deals, meaning as the years went by, the value of those deals dropped. Their Emirates shirt sponsor deal was worth around £5.5 million a season for 8 years, which was much less than the £20 million a year Liverpool and Man United were earning. It was the same with their kit deal with Nike for around £8 million a year, which was an even bigger gap to Liverpool and Manchester United, who earned £25 million a year. This meant from these deals, Arsenal were leaving at least £30 million a year on the table. Their commercial revenue as a result was super low compared to other clubs, so all the extra money they generated from the Emirates was pretty much cancelled out because of those deals. However, all of this only accounted for one side of the project, the stadium. But as mentioned earlier, this project had other parts to it. Parts that would cause Arsenal a lot of trouble. Turning Highbury into Highbury Square. On top of the 260 million loan for the stadium, the club also took out 2 more bank loans, including a £135 million bank loan for the construction of flats. This was a ton of debt and risk for the club, but their hope was that they'd actually make a profit from Highbury Square, selling the apartments at a high price. However, in 2007, profit was the last thing on their mind because selling the flats would be nearly impossible as the world had a global housing crisis right as Arsenal were building housing. While the football and property sides are financed differently, they still operate under Arsenal Group, meaning if the property side is broke, the club is broke. At this point, the property side was in heavy debt, not knowing if selling is even possible, meaning spending all their cash reserves that they had could cause a ton of damage. That cash was collateral just in case. In an economic recession, that uncertainty was enough to make the club reluctant to spend because, as Wenger put it, if you do not balance the books, you go bankrupt and die. In the 2009 reports, when construction was complete, they struggled to sell the apartments and pay off the debt, a loan that had to be paid off as soon as possible, not over 25 years. Arsenal had to prioritize this debt over investing in the squad, meaning Wenger was stranded. It wasn't until 2010 they finally sold enough flats to pay off the £135 million loan, but the prices were nowhere near expected pre-recession, and the profit they were hoping to earn to invest in the team was pretty much non-existent. This Highbury Square project was supposed to propel the team forward, but all it did was hold them back. By the time they paid the debt, Arsenal already had to deal with the consequences of not being able to spend money on the team, and it's what started their downfall, starting with Ashley Cole.
I would have signed for anything. It might have been 60 a week. That's what they kind of offered me, which I was delighted with. When they reneged, that was...
Oh, they pulled the contract on you?
That was my issue. That's what the whole issue is about. It's not about money. I would have signed for it. That was my...
So why did they pull the contract on you?
I don't know. Agent calls me and it's, right, they've reneged on it a little bit. It's take it or leave it. $5,000 less. To me, that matters. From 9 years of age, I've given you everything. And then to do that, I'm like, cool.
So it's principle, really, in the end.
No problem.
Absolutely.
It was a great shame because Ashley was homegrown. He was an Arsenal boy. I regret we didn't do enough really at the time to keep him at the club. And it was also when we were talking about building the stadium and finances, the tensions were raging about how we were going to finance the new stadium. And we were watching every penny, and consequently we didn't do enough to keep him. And I regret that with hindsight. So Ashley, if you're listening, I'm sorry.
Wenger said he regretted losing Ashley Cole as well. David Dein knew something had to change financially at the club. Arsène and I would come out of board meetings feeling like we'd been knocking our heads against a brick wall. There was a lot of friction because of the cost of the stadium, and we had to ration the salaries. David Dein couldn't stand and watch Arsenal slip into mediocrity, so he made a bold play. He knew that if Arsenal wanted to compete at the top, they too would need outside investment. He ended up privately consulting American billionaire Stan Kroenke, who bought 10% of the club for £65 million in 2007. This enraged the Arsenal board. They were furious that Dein had gone behind their backs to seek foreign investment and try and change the business model, so they forced him off the board. This was the real reason he left in 2007. It sparked a civil war that would destroy the club from within. One that almost made Wenger leave as he sided with his best friend David Dein, but Dein convinced him to stay. But that wasn't the case for Henry, who left because of this.
After Mr. Dein left, I needed to be certain of where the club was going, and I wasn't, then I've chosen to go.
Dein ended up partnering with Russian billionaire Alisher Usmanov, who bought Dein's 15% stake in the club using a company David Dein would be chairman of, meaning he kept his position at the club, but he could use Usmanov to buy and invest in the club. The board, seeing this, however, started to entertain the idea of Stan Kroenke buying out the club before Usmanov and Dein. This was now a race of who could get full ownership of Arsenal first. But by 2011, Stan Kroenke owned 62% of the club. He tried to buy Usmanov's shares, but Usmanov wasn't budging. This holdout only hurt the club. Kroenke wasn't willing to invest because if he did, all he'd be doing is increasing the club value, making the remaining shares he wanted more expensive. This meant despite having 2 billionaire owners, neither wanted to invest until they owned the club fully, yet neither were willing to sell. The result of all of these issues for Arsenal led to a team that collapsed in front of our eyes. From 2005 to 2013, big teams in Europe all had high net spends, willing to pump a lot of money into investing in their team. Yet Arsenal were the only team with a positive net spend. Net spend doesn't always equal how much you invest into the team, however. So let's look at a different metric. Let's take just the big six in England from 2001 to 2013 and see how many players each team brought for more than 20 million euros. Chelsea and City are rightfully high up, while Liverpool and United are more realistic. Spurs are quite low down with just 3. How many did Arsenal buy? 1. Just one player for 20 million euros, and it was Reyes in 2004. All the big clubs in England were willing to invest, yet Arsenal couldn't. This is how Arsenal missed out on big names like Eden Hazard, Yaya Toure, Ribéry and more. Hazard called Arsenal his dream move, but Arsenal couldn't afford him. Ribéry was eager to join, yet he didn't make his move. Xabi Alonso was begging to go, and in 2008 Arsenal bid £15 million for the midfielder, but Liverpool wanted £18 million. Arsenal were unwilling to pay the $3 million extra for a world-class player. Eventually they backed out, and Alonso would end up joining Real Madrid just a year later for £30 million. This lack of getting deals over the line was a huge point of frustration.
I was with Xavi on the phone the whole summer. He was dying to come, like literally begging everyone to go to Arsenal. He really wanted to come, and I to be honest, I did my best. And yeah, I have to say that a couple of times like that I was frustrated by the lack of push, that it's so close, the player is dying to come, the player is dying to be so easy to make this deal. It was a shame, because I think it would have been a great addition to that team.
Star players at the club having to watch top targets slip away, watching their chance of winning a league title fade, encouraged many of them to just leave. It's what happened with Samir Nasri, Cesc Fabregas and even Robin van Persie too.
We were not on the same page about moving forward. I was 29. I didn't have 10 more years left, but I wasn't patient anymore. I just needed to win for myself.
Their lack of spending drove players out the door. Yet the worst part for Arsenal was all of these guys would end up winning. Nasri and Clichy, the year after leaving, won the Premier League. Fabregas won titles at Barcelona and Chelsea. Ashley Cole won at Chelsea, Henry won 6 trophies in 1 year as part of Pep's Barcelona, and Van Persie, in his first year at United, won the Golden Boot and the Premier League title. Yet there's one quote amongst all of this that perfectly captures the mentality of the Arsenal board during this period. We know how it looked selling Van Persie to rivals, but getting £24 million for a 29-year-old was an important piece of business. It set us both up. The club didn't care about the optics or competition, or the fact that they were strengthening a direct contender. It was about money, which brings us to the biggest revelation of all about this period in Arsenal's history. We know Arsenal were making a profit, we know they had the cash reserves, and we know the housing crisis that hurt their Highbury project was solved in 2010. So why did Arsenal not just spend to try and keep Cesc, Nasri or Robin van Persie? Well, if we look at Arsenal's profit before tax between 2007 and 2013, we will see profit margins indicating the club clearly were making enough money to spend. Except this all changes when you look at where Arsenal were actually making this profit from. They made £225 million from selling players and £41 million from their property business. Meaning, if Arsenal didn't sell any players or make any money from property, that healthy profit they were making would turn into a £65 million loss. They were only making profit because they were selling players.
Sell a player I didn't want to sell?
Yes.
Many times.
Many times.
But for financial reasons.
If you weren't doing those deals, do you think Arsenal would have gone bust?
Of course.
So how many significant deals did you conjure to keep the club afloat?
I did every year, you know, because we had to pay the stadium back at the time. We needed to be in the top 4. I knew we had not anymore maybe the potential to win the championship, but we wanted at least to be on target, to be in the top 4.
Your realistic ambition at the beginning of every season was Champions League football. You knew the title was beyond you, but you also knew that come the end of any particular campaign, you had to sell a player.
Yes.
To stay afloat.
Yes, of course. But I accepted this challenge, and I think it's a period where I worked the most efficient and the best for the club. But that's where I told you before, it is what you leave behind that is important. Today the stadium is paid, Arsenal can invest money and hopefully win championships again.
This is why the club's mentality to letting someone like Robin van Persie go was more concerned about the money coming in rather than the fact they had just handed their rivals the title. It meant the profit Arsenal were making wasn't regenerative, so spending all that cash they made meant there was no guarantee of reliably making it back, which could damage the club in the long run. So they elected to just hold on to the cash and watch the team fail to compete for titles until they were able to reliably make cash elsewhere. Keep in mind, while all of this is happening behind the scenes, Wenger is still somehow keeping this team in the top 4, selling out the stadium and earning them money. If Wenger didn't keep this club in the Champions League and struggled to sell seats, the finances would have tanked even harder, leading to what could have been a real disaster for Arsenal. Wenger was one of the main reasons the club was still able to earn good revenue during this period. It wasn't until 2013-2014 that this financial turmoil was partially resolved. As mentioned, Arsenal needed a renewable revenue if they wanted to spend, and they achieved that. They ended up signing a $30 million a year deal with the Emirates, as well as a new Puma kit deal, meaning their commercial revenue jumped up massively, now reflecting the club's status. Plus, the Premier League had a new TV deal, meaning their broadcasting revenue increased too. This additional recurring revenue meant from 2013 onwards, Arsenal actually had the money to spend and not worry about never making that money back. That's why from 2013 until Wenger's resignation in 2018, Arsenal had a net spend that looked way more reasonable, signing the likes of Ozil, Sanchez, Xhaka and Aubameyang. And during this period, Arsenal went on to win 3 FA Cups. Spending money didn't make Wenger perfect. Despite the trophies, he was largely wanted out by fans before leaving in 2018. By then, he lost his edge and fans wanted a change. In that same year, Kroenke purchased Usmanov's shares to take full control of the club, meaning the stalemate was over and Kroenke in the future would invest money into the club. But it's easy to forget the impossible job Wenger did for the club. He had dragged Arsenal in their worst period to survive and stay relevant amidst an over-budgeted stadium, housing crisis, underpaid commercial deals, losing their best players while not being able to afford his top targets. At any point, Wenger could have left for another team at a much more resourceful job, but he embraced the challenge for Arsenal. To everyone's surprise but Wenger, once Wenger left, Arsenal would endure their worst period in decades, finishing 8th back-to-back and struggling before Arteta finally turned it around years later. Wenger was far from faultless. He made mistakes, but only he was capable of maintaining a team that was moments away from financial collapse for years. Because of him, Arsenal survived the storm, but the man who held the umbrella didn't. His legacy was tarnished, remembered as the man who could only come fourth. But when you know what was really going on behind the scenes, you would understand why he says,
from 2006 to 2015 was the period where I needed to be the strongest and did the best job, because I accepted to commit for 5 years when you build the stadium to work with restricted resources and keep the club in a position where we can pay our debts back. And I personally think I did my best job during that period. Not the most glamorous, maybe, but the most difficult.